Welcome to Mommy Heal Thyself. We feature guests who provide you with the tools, resources, and strategies you need to say no to a life of pain and suffering from all forms of preventable disease, toxic drugs, and unnecessary surgeries. We hope to inspire you to boldly reclaim your ability to heal and to serve the ones you love.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. Today I have with me Steve Olsen. He is a cancer coach and educator. After attending the University of Michigan Dental School, he taught for 2 years and was also involved in research. He retired from dentistry in 2020. When life handed him the challenge in 2023, he was diagnosed with 2 types of cancer. He chose to take this as a challenge and use the principles of optimal performance that he developed while helping clients achieve their own goals. He's now applied these principles to boosting his own immune system to be able to handle the challenges of cancer. His approach is grounded in being calm, being properly hydrated, being positive in your self-talk, being focused in what matters most in one's passion and purpose. My Steve, it has been a journey for you. I am honored and blessed to have you here with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about 2023. What happened and how did you decide to shift into this very different approach to dealing with cancer?
Okay.
And what was that approach?
Well, the approach was this. It's years ago, since I live in Colorado and I'm a skier, years ago I learned the 3 most dangerous words on the ski slope, which is Dad, follow me. Okay. Very, very dangerous. But in February of 2024, I learned the 3 most life-changing words. They say, you have cancer. Now, what's crazy about this is that, first of all, it's definitely a life changer, regardless of where you're at and what you're doing. But what I found interesting is they verbally or non-verbally say, now relax so your body will heal. Well, one of the things I found with working with cancer patients is it's almost impossible to relax. And I know you have the program of Mommy Heal Thyself, and having 2 kids myself, you say, well, now relax while you're raising children. Well, good luck on that one. But that's where it requires certain disciplines and especially a mindset to get to the point where you can relax. Because I ask people, are you better when you're calm or when you're stressed? And most people say, I'm better when I'm calm because I perform better. And everybody's had the experience with kids that they get so stressed and they look back with regret at times saying, why did I do it that way? So regardless of the situation, if you can learn to relax in combination with try to learn to respond rather than react, it gets you much further. So that's kind of where I started.
So now take us back to, like I said, 2023. When
Okay.
and how and what was the diagnosis? And how did you get to this point where you found a new way of approaching this situation?
Yeah, very good. Good question. I was diagnosed with 2 types of cancer. One of them is stage 4 lymphoma, which means it's everywhere in your body.
Yeah.
And the other one was stage 4 kidney cancer.
Jeez, a double whammy.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, though, because of doing my research and my work with mindset, I knew of a gentleman by the name of Carl Symington. He wrote a book years ago called Getting Well Again. That was in the early 70s. And what he did as a radiology oncologist is he said, why do people with the same path report and the same treatment, why do some people die on time according to medicine and others are alive 10 years later? And what I did is I said, I looked at what he did, and he has about 20 principles. And two of them that I really like using with patients is developing hope and developing resilience, because that is critical. The other thing, especially with cancer, I find is that they almost call it time-based. And this is true of a lot of different conditions. You got 6 months, you got 3 years, or whatever it happens to be. But it's kind of like football. Are you in the first quarter, the second half, the 2-minute warning? But cancer is not like that. Cancer is more like baseball, which is if you're still at bat, you can still win. And that's why the first mindset shift is to not think of it as a time issue, think of it as a possibility issue. The other thing when I was in practice is I used to say the reason we call it practice is because I can tell you exactly what happens to 84.7% of the people. I have no idea what happens to you. And so whenever you have a life challenge, don't look at the probabilities, even though you don't want to ignore them. Look at the possibilities as to what can be. So with that in mind, I took the principles of being the calm, the self-talk, and whatnot, saying, has anybody survived with my kind of cancer? And the answer is definitely yes. And so that's when I knew there was hope. The other interesting thing is when I first went into the hospital, I was on the same floor that all the cancer patients were on, but they didn't know I had cancer. That's a real mind trip. And so then I'd been there for about a week when they were trying to figure out what was going on. And I asked one of the nurses, very insightful gentleman, I said, why do people die from cancer? He says they give up. And I said, that's where the other key is resilience. So that's the two main focus we use, but those aren't the only two.
Well, you bring up something that's really interesting. When you say those three magic words, so-called, you have cancer or I have cancer. And that's what I refer to, or I encourage people to refer to it as medical hexing, where it seems almost magical that those words could have such a tremendous impact on us, where we're completely transformed out of the realm of miracles and wonder and possibilities. And we start to buy into that framing that you have X amount of days left and you are at this stage and whatever it is. And it makes me think about yesterday, I was watching football with my husband, and I usually don't watch that game because it makes it makes no sense to me. I just kind of look at the colors of the uniform and, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is that about halftime, the score was 27-3. And he was saying, well, we might as well just turn it off. The game is over. And I was like, well, okay, you enjoy the game. Go ahead and finish the game. And it so turned out that in the second half, actually in the fourth quarter, is when there was a complete upset. And the team that had previously been at 3, they actually won the game. And it was just a reminder to me that you just never know. And when they interviewed one of the players afterwards, they said, well, what is it that made you, press on? And he said, because we realized that we were there to do a game, that we were there to make it to the end and to do what we needed to do. And it was just amazing that we teach children this when it comes to sports, but we don't really teach them this when it comes to what really matters in life, which is your own health and well-being.
Oh, yeah, I 100% agree with you. Yeah, that's why, like the self-talk. One of the people I ran into years ago by the name of Shad Hempstead, he wrote a couple of books on self-talk. And what was fascinating, one of his stats was by the time people reach age 18, about 2/3 of the information they get from parents and people of authority are no. Not yes, or you can do it, no. So most people have a self-talk which is negative, not positive. And that's so critical especially when raising children, to say, yes, you can do it.
Or even if you are given the situation where you don't want them to engage in one thing or one behavior, instead of presenting that as a no, to say, well, you can instead do this,
Beautiful. Yes.
And that's what I keep on sharing with people, even when we talk about safe food and people get fixated on, well, Michelle, I can't eat this. I'm like, but what can you eat? Let's focus on what you can eat. Let's focus on the possibilities that are, as opposed to the things that aren't. So I'm curious, how were you able to make that shift? Because you're right. One of the biggest things with a cancer diagnosis, or what I call the medical hexing, is that they immediately present you with this version of life which says you are dying, and you are resolved to this particular outcome, and this is your life, especially when you're at stage 4. And the fact that you had 2 stage 4 categories of cancer, I'm curious as to how you were able to either reject that particular programming or transform and change that programming.
Excellent question. The first thing I did was I looked for somebody, has anybody with my situation been alive 10 years later? And the answer is yes. In fact, when I was in practice, since I had a different type of dental practice, I focused a lot on wellness and links between oral health and systemic problems. I had patients, I remember years ago, I had one vividly, she had pancreatic cancer. She was given 6 months to live. 10 years later, she's still alive. And I love those stories. I had multiple patients. In fact, recently, when I was back in my office, I talked to another patient. Her daughter had brain cancer. They gave her less than a 10% survival factor. Well, she beat the odds. But again, they didn't ask her what she did. And it was her mindset that said, I can do that. In fact, I remember years ago, the movie Dumb and Dumber. An interesting movie. You ever see that movie?
Yes.
Yeah, I love it because I mean the title was Truth in Advertising, but the scene I love is when Jim Carrey is trying to date the woman, and he says, "Is there a chance I can date you?" She says, "1 in a million," and he says, "Yes."
There's a chance.
Right. That's the first thing is possibility thinking. In fact, another one I heard of was a gentleman, Joel Olstein, the preacher on television. He talked about his mother. His mother, something like 15 years ago, was given 3 months to live, and she lived for 10 or 15 years. Because now, for her, it was faith and clarity. But the key there is you want to have a vision of the future that you can say, this is the correct one, and I'm going to strive for that. That's where the resilience comes in, because resilience involves looking to the future at a preferred outcome.
Yeah. And, this reminds me of my training with the Amen Clinic, where Dr. Amen talks about ants, automatic negative thoughts. And he said, the challenge that we have is that we tend to believe every stupid thought that comes to us. We tend to believe every medical hex that is presented to us. Instead of asking the question like you did, is it possible that someone can actually thrive with cancer, live with cancer? Live with this type of cancer that I'm being presented with, and to have the reality that if there's one possibility, then that means that many more are possible. So I'm curious, how did you find out about someone who had your similar type of cancer and the survival for that person?
Well, one of the things I like to do is when you're talking to medical doctors, because there's a balance between needing their services and being totally compliant. So one of the things I recommend to people is whenever you're talking to your doctor, preface any question you have with "tell me about." And so what you do is you get feedback on their whatever they say, and then the key there is whatever they tell you, don't sit there and argue with them. No, but
Don't
just say thank you for your input, and then move on. Because one of the things I asked one of my doctors is I said, tell me about the outcomes of this and that. And whether they said it positive or negatively, I only listen to the positive. And that to me makes a huge difference, is open your mind to what is possible. And probable is a secondary thing that doesn't necessarily apply to you.
You remind me, I had a training session with one of our coaches today, and I was saying to them that it's flabbergasting to me that, most people preface or interpret what doctors say as mandates and as facts coming down from God Almighty, inscribed into the tablets like the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. And I said, I like to encourage people to reframe things and to consider that those doctors are individuals coming from their own perspectives, and prescriptions, I refer to prescriptions as suggestions, and I refer to prognoses as opinions, and that's it.
I
I
love
don't
it.
give it any more credence than that.
Yep.
And that's what reminds me of what you're saying, that to place as a priority that which is inscribed upon your own heart.
Yeah.
And to devalue everybody else's stuff, because everybody else is coming from their own perspective, their own interaction with reality, and to not allow it to be your story. So what you're telling me is that you're like, you know what, I'm going to write my own story. And I know that the end of this book is going to have a whole lot more chapters than what they're telling me.
Yeah, the other interesting thing about cancer is when I first looked at it, I said to myself, well, you've got the diagnosis. In a way, it's a gift. Now, that may be a strange way to think of, but like in this country, the most common cause of death is heart disease or heart attack. Mm-hmm. And the most common first symptom is death. So it's kind of, when you're given cancer, if nothing else, you
like,
have
thank you, God.
Yeah, because you have a way, you have time to think about what you've been doing and maybe a different path you want to take. Because one of the things that I'm a great believer is that I actually have 6 principles, the 4 of them you mentioned, and then the 2 bonus ones if they get it. But the one that I love is I was riding up on a ski lift years ago from a gentleman that was extremely wealthy, but he was probably the single biggest funder of cystic fibrosis research. Amazing man. And we're riding up on the chair and he gets off and he says, you got to add one more thing, and that is be kind. And you got to be kind, especially to yourself.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And then I have one more that I added, which is be grateful. Whatever's going on, be grateful. And that's one of the exercises I do, is that every night I write a list that I'm grateful for.
That, I think, is one of the most precious gifts. The attitude of gratitude. No matter where you are in life, no matter what is happening, there's always something to be grateful for. And I remember reading, I think it's the book Men's Search for Meaning with
Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl. And that's what he said, that that attitude of gratitude is one that allows people to be self-sustaining, that it keeps you from the disparaging energy of death. If you can hold on to just one thing that you can be grateful for rather. And so I love how you actually framed it. Even when you think of something like cancer, it's actually a wonderful opportunity, because at least it wasn't a heart attack, because then it's all over. There's no opportunity after that particular diagnosis, right?
Right. So, now that also, because of what I've done as profession, you tend to always want to think 10 minutes ahead, the next patient, the next this, the next that, how long is this going to take? But I've really become more focused on now. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like when I was raising my kids, or my wife and I were raising our kids, I wish I'd spent more time just in the moment. Mm-hmm. Even if it was just something that you hated at the moment because they were fighting or something, but be in the moment to appreciate that moment, because you never know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So now, as we wrap up for today, what is one thing that you find is perhaps the most important message for people to leave this conversation with? Or perhaps there's something that you wanted to communicate that we haven't covered yet?
Excellent question. Part of it is experience your life. A lot of people end up in regret or worry about the future. The only thing you can do is be in the moment. And learn to be in the moment, whether it's with your kids, your situation, even though at the time you may say, I don't want to be here. there's some benefit with the experience you're having at that time. And the other one is that when you look at your whole life, what are you going to regret or not regret? And decide on things. You're going to do things that you won't regret. That doesn't mean you're successful in everything. In fact, what was interesting is that recently I heard of what Winston Churchill's definition of a success was. And that is maintaining a positive attitude even though in between your failures. So there's always I can do this. I'll look forward to this, but be in the moment.
Beautiful, beautiful considerations for us all. And I know that you are sharing with our community a beautiful guide that will help them strategically deal with this particular hexing for themselves or family members or friends. So tell us a little bit about that guide.
Okay. The guide, I actually have two of them. The first one, mainly related to cancer, is called Coping and Conquering Cancer. And in there, I talk about several principles, but I also have briefly listed some of the things that Dr. Symington talked about. There's about 20 principles that make the difference between the people that live long and the ones that don't. The other one I have is talking about how to increase your performance. But the basis of that is those 4 principles. And especially learn to be calm and learn to respond, not react.
Very, very good recommendations.
Thank you.
My dear Steve, I am so grateful for you sharing with us your story and your strategies of how to overcome and to thrive in the midst of the medical hexing that we call cancer. And ladies and gents, I encourage you to download the guide that Steve is sharing with us, actually the guides, plural, that Steve is sharing with us. I will have the links in the show notes. And until next time, peace and blessings.
Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Mommy Heal Thyself. If you like what we're doing here, please share, subscribe, like us, and leave a comment. Your feedback is very much appreciated.